Hi, welcome back to Geography 101, Chapter 20 on biomes and ecosystems. And in this part, we're going to look at essentially a lot of California's biomes and how they fit in with the jigsaw puzzle of biomes across the planet. And now we're moving on to broadleafed and mixed forests. California doesn't have a ton of this, but we do have some, and it's important to know where they are and why they are where they are. In these types of forest, an assortment of mammals, birds, and reptiles, and this is widely distributed across the planet. Much of the eastern half of the United States would be in broadleaf mixed forest if it wasn't or it hadn't been logged and turned into farmland in many of the areas. It's a product of good quality soils and reasonably decent climates. And in those places where those good soils and reasonable climates are abundant, then it's been logged. As you go further west out of, say, Ohio in towards Indiana and Illinois, that this gives way to grasslands. And then as you go north out of, say, Ohio and Indiana in the Midwest up towards Minnesota and Michigan, northern Michigan, then you get poor soils, colder climates, and then it turns to pine forest, the coniferous trees. These types of forest, the broadleaf forests, are often called a hardwood forest. Keep that in mind. Oak trees, hickory trees, that kind of stuff. Very good for making hardwood floors. Not so great for making, say, the 2x4s that frame a house. Hard to work with, hard to nail, but very good resistance to wear. So that's why they're used for flooring. And so this is an image of a hardwood forest in the eastern part of the United States. You see the brilliant colors of what appear to be maybe maple trees turn bright colors after a frost in the fall, and some you can see, for example, right there, a few pine trees mixed in with these broadleaf trees. That's why they call it a mixed forest. Now, California has a certain amount of these sort of mixed forests. In this image, note that the western hardwoods that are available appear here and at the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, and occasionally here and there elsewhere throughout the state. But a great deal of California's great forests are in coastal redwoods, and then in these vast stretches of montane, high montane forests of fir, spruce, lodgepole pine, etc. And then check out some of these pinyon juniper areas on the back sides of the San Gabriels and Santa Monicas. Of course, that's all too much to remember. So what I think is fair to ask you is to understand that there are coniferous forests that are available all around here. Some of these we're going to call the temperate rainforest, the coastal pine forest, the coastal redwoods, and then you've got your oak woodlands, the hardwoods in this area around the edges of the mountains and scattered here and there in other places. We have grasslands through the Great Central Valley, desert scrubland out here in the southeastern part of the state, and chaparral scattered along the coastal zones, particularly here in Southern California, and bits and pieces further north. These, I think, are fair to ask you to remember. The oak woodlands that we do have in California sometimes appear to be very similar to the savannas of the African grassland areas. And they have a similar climatic conditions that is wet, dry. In Africa, you get the rains that come for a longer period, but we also have that here in California where we have a wintertime rainy season that is reasonably short. These oak woodlands appear at the edges of the Great Central Valley, but you can also find them out in Malibu, Calabasas area. Sometimes they're in the wetter zones uphill or where there's some moisture with better soils. There's both deciduous and evergreen oaks, and some are drought deciduous, meaning they drop their leaves during the drought. The valley oak and the coast live oak are the two really important types of trees that you will find in these kind of forests, if you would categorize them as forest. A lot of it's been destroyed because it's good farmland in many instances. Now here is one of those savanna or open oak woodlands, hardly a woodland at all. This is south of Bakersfield is where I took this picture. 2 or 3 lonely valley oaks out there in a grassland. In some places you can see the same thing where it's dry, but in this valley or canyon here, there's a lot more moisture available, and so it's a nearly closed canopy oak woodland. The book discusses these great pine forests of the world as both boreal, meaning up towards the North Pole, scattered across Canada and the northern United States, Russia, and the Scandinavian countries, and then very similar looking forests often appearing at high altitudes, the montane forest. And we don't really have boreal forests in California of any extent because we're just not that far north. But we do have montane forests. These are needle leaf forests, meaning they're mostly pine trees of that sort. They're replicated in the high mountain areas. Here's a map that shows where these boreal forests are in dark purple. Notice that this is true boreal, and then we get some of that montane version of it that dips down into the Sierras and the Cascades. They have similar things in the Rocky Mountains. Note over here in the light purple is the coastal redwoods, or book calls that the temperate rainforest of the Pacific Northwest. Here's what a boreal forest in Canada might look like. Extensive, far-ranging stands of these pine trees. Many of these might be Douglas firs. We have those in Northern California. In northwestern California, we have these needle leaf forests that are called temperate rainforests, and they grow in the marine west coast climate, where again you got rainforest-like conditions, 160 inches of rain sometimes up in Oregon and Washington, but they do reach down into California. Cool temperatures, abundant precipitation, high humidity, and tough soil conditions. Remember, those altisols are up there in that area of California. You can find things like Monterey pine, cypress, bishop pine, Torrey pines, but the two biggies are the Douglas fir and the coastal redwoods. This is what it might look like here. Old growth Doug fir, redwoods, cedars, that sort of stuff, and the northern spotted owl with a chick here. And this is a species that was endangered when these old growth forests were being rapidly chopped down, because these kind of birds only nest in very old trees. Those types of trees are very attractive to logging companies, and so it was a great huge battle, and the birds won, which unfortunately put a number of people out of work that worked in that forest industry. Here's what you might see out the window of a plane if you were flying over a commercial tree operation where perhaps this kind of forest was logged, cut down, and replanted with fast-growing Doug firs trees that are essentially kind of Christmas trees. Here's some of those other trees, the cypress, and the Torrey pine, for example. The most famous of all those trees on the California coastline is the Sequoia sempervirens, or the coast redwood. These used to be a lot more widespread many, many years ago, and they are the tallest trees on Earth, reaching nearly 400 feet tall. That's taller than some industrial smokestacks, for example. They also grow very high, grow very long. It's because of the mild, wet winters, that's spelled incorrectly, and foggy summers. They get as much as 20 inches of rain just through fog drip, which is more than double what the San Fernando Valley gets through rain during the year. This protects them from fire, which allows them to grow very long and to be very old. If you ever get a chance to get up north of San Francisco and take a walk in one of these woods, you may find it life-changing. I absolutely love these forests. They feel sacred to me. In some of the lower areas that are mountainous, and again, this is not necessarily mountainous, they are near the coast, but not necessarily at high elevation. There are trees in the lower mountains here near Los Angeles, Ponderosa pine and Jeffrey pine, that you could find in the San Gabriels, for example, Topa Topa Mountains, the San Indigio Mountains just north of LA. These are another kind of pine trees. There's a lot of different species in California, which is kind of odd because most needle-leaf forests are dominated by a single species. One of the things to keep in mind when you think about pine trees is just how tough they are. This is a ponderosa pine, I believe, growing essentially out of almost bare rock up in Yosemite, and this is a kind of conditions that a broadleaf oak tree could never survive in. And so these trees take advantage of everything that they can and are able to grow in stunning conditions that would eliminate other trees. Here's the ponderosa pine and the Jeff pine that you find in the mountains near Los Angeles quite commonly. Both can grow to very large heights. 250 feet is not uncommon for either of these trees. Where it's a little higher, but often poor soils, you may find different sorts of pine trees, red fir, lodgepole pines at high elevations. You may even find the famous quaking aspens. You should look that up. Here's some of the photo of some lodgepole pines that you would find at elevations that are close to as high as you can get and still get trees. And the most famous of the trees that are in that area is the giant sequoia, which is the world's largest by volume tree. So it's essentially the biggest living thing on earth are these giant sequoias. And you can put photos all you want up, but you can't really understand how big those trees are until you've stood here and felt like an ant at the base of them. Then there are subalpine forests, which are very high up, from 6,000 feet all the way up to the tree line, and the tree line is the place where trees stop growing. Mountain hemlock is the one that's most far up, and it's so difficult to grow there, it only looks like a scrub. The bristlecone pines are the other trees that you must know. They are the oldest trees on earth, some more approaching nearly 5,000 years old, and here's what they look like growing in that very challenging dolomite soil. It doesn't even look like dirt, but these trees, it staggers the imagination to think that these trees were, say, 2,000 years old at the time of the Romans. And at that point, we'll pause.